Hey guys, so this is my vintage 1930 Singer 101-4. This is the predecessor to the Singer 201, which many people consider to be the finest straight stitch only sewing machine that Singer ever made. I have a tendency to agree with that. I've used pretty much all of the machines in the Singer line in terms of the straight stitches, and I would say the 201 and the 301 are really the best. I'd really say the 201 is probably the nicest machine that they ever made. But this Singer 101, which is the predecessor, it's pretty close. This thing is really, really nice. This is their first electric sewing machine. Came out in 1920 and was in production for 17 years. This particular one is 1930. You can see it's just like in phenomenal, excellent condition. I was fortunate enough to purchase this one locally from a gentleman who was selling it on Craigslist. It was his grandmother's machine. She had purchased it new, so it's had one owner its whole life. And he had it on there for a couple months. He wasn't able to sell it because, one, it's a Singer 101, which isn't as common of a machine because they were expensive, so not many people purchased them. But also because the motor wasn't working in it, so it's kind of a tough sell if vintage machine isn't working, because there's not a lot of people that know how to repair them. And the other thing too is it's kind of in an era where it's kind of in between where they had really ornamental decorative decaling, like the Sphinx and the gingerbread and the red eye decaling, which people like because they like them as ornamental, like decorative pieces. So it's kind of in between that era and the era where the machine started coming standard with reverse, which most people think today that that's a necessary mandatory feature to have. It's not really. It's nice, and if you become accustomed to using it, it's kind of tough to transition back to a machine that doesn't have it, but it's by no means a necessity. And I'll show you some of the techniques you can use to keep from having to, or that will allow you to lock stitch without having to have reverse. So I was lucky enough to get it. I finished refurbishing it the other night, fixed the motor, pulled it apart, gave it a thorough servicing, and it runs phenomenally. Initially, we were intending on making a display using some vintage Singers that we have. We've kind of transitioned over to industrial machines for the most part, but we were considering making a, and we are going to make a display for some of the vintage machines we have. Trying to remember the name of the store that has them in their the Singers displayed in their window. I'll put it in the notes. I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but there's a store that has them displayed, and they build stands for them using structural fittings, and it looks pretty neat. So we were going to do that and display a 101, a 201, a 301, and a couple other machines we have, all in a column basically for our cutting room. But I restored this, and I liked it so much that I don't even know if I want to put it on display. I kind of want to use it. We'll see what my wife thinks about it. She'll have to give it a shot and see if she prefers it over the 201. But yeah, so it shares a lot of things in common with the 201. It's fully gear driven. It has a potted motor. It has a horizontal rotary hook. It's a lot of things are similar. It uses a class 66 bobbin. So it has a lot of similarities, but also has a lot of differences, which I'll point out. Let me do a quick sewing demonstration on it, just so you can see how the thing sews, and then I'll kind of go over some of the really unique things about this machine that really differentiate it from the 201 and kind of make it stand out compared to some of the other machines in the Singer line. So yeah, so it's got a light on the back. I'm going to turn that off though, because I don't want the machine to constantly try to refocus, because the reflections on the bed of the machine is kind of tough on the camera. So you can see how well this thing sews. It's right now adjusted to about 8 stitches per inch. You can see the sound of that is just so good. You hear very little noise coming from the hook area, just that thread passing through. Really no motor sound. And you can see how fast this machine is. It hasn't even warmed up. This thing will sew more than 1,000 stitches per minute, which I think that's the only thing I don't like about the Singer 201 is I feel like it sews too slow. And especially now that we use industrial machines, it's difficult to go back to a machine that sews less than 1,000 stitches per minute. So this thing sews pretty quickly, and it has the same feel as the 201, just faster. Now it doesn't have reverse like I was saying, so here are the ways that you can get around not having reverse on the machine, because I don't want that to be a deterrent for anybody who may be considering this machine, because I like this machine more than any 1591, 66, 99, 128, any of this vintage Singer machines, even the ones that had reverse. I like this machine more than, I like it better really than the 301 even. So here's some of the techniques that you can use to basically do a lock stitch at the beginning and end of your sewing. So there's 3 ways, or a little bit more, 4 ways. So you can do the standard, which is a couple stitches forward, and then rotate it, a couple stitches back, rotate it, and then go forward again. Okay, that will create a really seamless lock stitch. 3 layers of stitching. Now the other way is, let's say you want to go in this, sew in this direction. So you would start with the piece facing the wrong way. You would sew 3 or 4 stitches going the wrong way, turn it around, and then continue sewing going the right way. That will create a double stack. Instead of 3 layers, you get 2 layers of stitching, so it's a little bit cleaner. So that's another way. A third way is you can sew. So you start out, you sew 3 stitches or 4 stitches, whatever you may do. Raise the needle, pull the garment back, and start in that beginning hole again and sew right over it. And what you're effectively doing is you create 3 stitches or 4 stitches in a row, 1 long stitch to go back to the beginning, and then sew back over that. And that will also create a lock stitch. Another way is to shorten the stitch length. Now you can either do that via the dial here, actually manually on the machine, shorten the stitch length really short, or you can hold the material and keep it from feeding through the feed dogs. So you go, so see, I'm letting it feed really slowly, and I'm doing like 20 stitches per inch as opposed to 8. So it creates maybe of a 1/4 of an inch, that's it, and then you can continue going. So it'll create a whole series of really tight stitches. Well, try it for yourself and see. You won't be able to pull that apart. The stitches will bind on themselves basically and not allow that stitch to open up. So that's one way, is you can hold it or do it manually, adjust the stitch length manually. The other way too is you can raise the presser foot just a little bit and run a few stitches. Raise the presser foot just enough to keep the feed dogs from advancing the material, but not so high that you disengage the upper tension. And then you'll create a little knot on the bottom. So those are a few ways that you can get around having the lock stitch. Once you get used to doing that, and it may take you sewing on the machine a few times to really, remember to sew and then raise it and then sew again. And it's not a big deal, or start sewing and then let it go. But once you get used to it, that's it. It's a non-issue. So you can see this thing, it's so smooth, so fast. Stitches are phenomenal, just like you would expect. It's just such an impressive machine. I really can't say enough about this. It doesn't get talked about too often. People are, talking about 1591s and the rest, but this is impressive. Also, the throat space here is huge. It's really long, so this would be good. If you're into quilting or whatever, it's a great machine. So let me get into the details on it. So the machine has here, if I can get it to focus, it has a full horizontal rotary hook. And you can just see the plating on these parts is just phenomenal. Even like the retainer ring here on the hook is plated. It's like polished really well. If you get one of these, you do have to pull it apart because this one was impacted with lint like crazy. I don't know how any thread was passing underneath there. I didn't try sewing with it before I cleaned it, but I can imagine it probably didn't do too well. Creates tension issues. So you can see it's totally polished. All the parts, all super polished. The finish on this machine is just phenomenal. Even the feet, like these are different than the standard. This is a hinged foot, where most of them from this era are not hinged. They're straight. But you can just see that it's polished, that all the edges are really squared off. It's different than the modern than the early or the later feet. As we go around the machine here, you can see there's just, you have that scroll work, the Egyptian scrollwork faceplate, which was common for the machines prior to World War II or the 50s. Most of them after the 50s are striated. Here you can see it's got an automatic bobbin winder, like a lot of the other ones that disengages. It's got a little tiny hand wheel, a lot smaller. That's one of the things. You look at this machine, you go, oh, this hand wheel looks so little. Because most of them are a lot larger in diameter, so it's kind of, it throws you off to see it that size. Here you can see on the back, this is the potted motor. So rather than on a Singer 201 and a 1591, these other potted motors, the motor drives the hand wheel, which then drives the upper shaft. This one's different in that the motor drives the upper shaft, which then spins the hand wheel. And the unique thing about this, it's pretty impressive, is you turn the hand wheel and you have practically no friction. Now, typically on these machines, you will encounter some resistance from having to rotate, because as you rotate the hand wheel, the motor also has to turn over. And same with machines that have a belt on the hand wheel, you have to overcome that motor, that friction there. The way that this is built, as you rotate the hand wheel, I'm not going to do it because it's threaded, but there's no friction. You actually, as you rotate the hand wheel, it independently operates everything, but disengages the motor. So the motor actually doesn't turn. So this thing spins as if there's no motor connected. So you can spin it by hand, and there's very little friction. The other thing about it too is the way that it's set up is you can't rotate it backwards. It only wants to rotate towards you, and you can see you get some spring resistance there, and then it goes back. So you can't rotate this in the wrong direction. It only rotates forward, and it also has that same mechanism that you'll find on the Singer 201s and the 1591s, where the motor spins up, and there's actually a gear. The gear is sprung, so there's some tension on the gear, so it makes it really for a smooth transition. That's what that spring is when you try to rotate it back. The lamp is integrated into the actual body of the machine, and you can see this is a plated steel, and it's gorgeous. Like all these other ones are plastic, or they're like a painted steel like this. This one's like a polished plated steel. It's not painted. You have a really positive action. I have a lot of Singers, so I've seen a lot of their lights. This is the nicest one without a doubt. The switch, everything. It's just so impressive. Now here's really where it starts to get unique for this machine. You tilt the machine back and you look and you notice the entire bottom is totally enclosed like a tub. And there's two openings, an opening there and there. And you can pop those out. Those are just little covers to get access to these two lower drive gears, so you can clean the oil out and re-oil them, clean up those gears. But there's no way to access anything else. So you have to be able to access the lower assembly. Now this is really where this machine is just so unique. I'm going to show you. Hopefully it's not focusing problems. But so I'm going to undo these. There's 4 screws on the bed of the machine, 4 black ones, and then you have 2 on the needle plate. So you loosen all 4 of these black screws in the corners. Sorry, you'll have to bear with me here as I do this, but it'll be worth it because I want you to see what it looks like on the underside. Okay. So you remove those 4 screws because you hear it's hollow. So remove the foot and remove the needle. Move those screws to the side. And you're going to grab it just by the bobbin winder is fine. Grab it here and then pivot it out and then angle it away. And the whole bed removes from the machine. You can see it comes right off. No other machine that I'm aware of does this. And it really reveals the insides. Now this is what's so wild about this machine. If you look, sorry with the focus. If you look here, this now gives you access to the entire lower assembly. And you're looking at this going, what is this? This is a spider wicking system, similar to what you would see on self-oiling industrial machines. So you have your oiling points like a standard Singer soy machine. So you put a drop of oil here, 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 you know, the standard location here, to oil the machine. Well, this whole assembly here is essentially the stitch length or the feed dog assembly. This lower shaft drives the gear that drives the hook. This oils all of the parts. And now I'm gonna the needle's out, so I'm gonna hold the thread here on the bobbin case. I'm gonna show you so you can see this movement here. All of this movement, all of this entire assembly is just for the feed dogs. And you can't drop the feed dogs on this machine, but that's okay. It should come stock with the needle plate cover, so you can use a darning foot and a free motion embroidery foot. But anyway, so since you can't access these components from the underside like you would on a typical machine, you actually oil it from the top through the hole next to the accessory holes, mounts. So it's right here. This is the only non-threaded hole, so it's the one right in front of the two parallel. Okay. You're gonna they say in the manual 12 drops of oil into that reservoir, and it will wick it through the rest of the system. And you have to oil this machine before you use it every time, apparently. That's what they say. Now you could fill this up to the top, but the thing is if you have a folding table and you go to fold it down, you're gonna spill this oil and you could have seepage through the side. Could be a mess. Also a portable case, you'll have it splashing, but at least it won't be tilted. But anyway, this is a really unique thing. You're not going to see it. And you can see the stitch length, since this mechanism is all down here, and there's only one shaft coming through the pillar. And that's just to drive the lower gear. That I can see at least. I'm sure there's one other rocker here for you can see right for this assembly, but so there's minimal parts coming down through here. So they put the stitch length dial here. They say 6 through 30, but they say it doesn't correspond to the actual stitches per inch, but it's pretty close. So you just turn this dial and you can see the arm there move. So it's shortening or lengthening the stitch length. But so that's a really unique thing about this machine. You're not going to see it on any others. You have to be aware of it too. If you buy one of these, clean this area out, pull the bed off. Most people don't even realize that that's how you actually get to it. So I really like this machine. I'm like beyond impressed with it. The finish quality and just the details on it, the machine is so refined, and you could see why it was their most expensive machine at the time. I mean, the light assembly, just the plating on all the small parts, the complexity, the internals, but still how smooth it runs, and also the motor is just so smooth. And then to reinstall this, so you're gonna put it back on, line it up with the post here, and then I use that as a pivot point to slide it around. And then you drop it in place and then tighten that back down. But if you run across one, check out the motor, the wiring, make sure it's okay. The thing about the wiring is that it does come out from underneath on the bed of the machine. And the wiring comes out and it goes to the plug. Now, in the case that it came in, or the table that it came in, this was just screwed into the back of the table with a knee lever directly wired to it. I changed out the wiring and used it for rewired it for a foot controller for the time being. I need to figure out what I'm going to do with that plug, because there's no provision here, like all the other Singers that you'll see, where you can mount that plug assembly. There's no external motor mount here, or hand crank mount, or anything. This was the only model that was strictly designed for electric use. A lot of the other ones, there's different models: treadle version, hand crank version, motored version. This was designed from the outset to be an electric driven machine, potted motor, so there's no provision for that. The Singer 201, they cast that body in a way that it allowed them to use that same body with a potted motor, with a hand crank, in a treadle. So you can actually convert those machines between any of the three. This one you cannot. So just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about that, is you have to figure out how to do the plug. I'm probably going to build a stand for it and then mount that and then route out a hole in the base to where the plug comes out of the side of the base and it's flush with the surface and you plug it in. So yeah, if you run across one, really give it some consideration. Oh, the stock parts that it comes with. This is what they call a Godzilla accessory box. This didn't come with the machine. I had the box. I didn't have all the accessories for it, but the accessories from this era fit in this box. So he had all the feet. I was lucky enough to get them, so that I put them all in the box and it fit perfect, which was kind of just a lucky coincidence. But so it includes all the standard feet, ruffler foot, rolled hem, all this stuff. This is the needle plate for the free motion embroidery and darning. So you actually remove the needle clamp, and this takes the place of the existing needle clamp. And it's actually a really cool unit. You have to use it with the cover plate because you can't drop the feed dogs, but that's by design because now it's taken into, this foot takes into account this raised portion. And it does really well with free motion embroidery and darning. I tested this thing out and it actually works really well. But this type of system can only be used on this machine, and the earlier Singers cannot be used on like a 221 or any of these other machines that have a different needle clamp style. So otherwise it comes with all of these parts. So yeah, phenomenal. I mean, I'm really impressed with this. I'm really happy I picked it up. I was having some reservations about it. But yeah, so if you run across it, really give it some thought. I think it's a great, if you're a collector, 100% great addition to the collection. But if you're actually going to use it, which I suggest, if you're going to get into these vintage machines, use them. They perform so much better than a lot of this modern stuff. This is a machine that I would use daily without question. It's really, really nice. So there it is. This is a Singer 101-4 horizontal rotary hook with a potted motor, direct drive, and it's a phenomenal performer. So thanks for watching, guys.